Cape independence could be closer than we think after this latest development. Over the past few years, the discussion of the Western Cape secession from the rest of South Africa has been a hotly contested topic of debate. And while there are plenty of arguments both for and against this idea of secession, it seems as if the argument is actually picking up steam in recent times, particularly after the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke out on the matter. So Ramaphosa actually decided to voice his rejection of any kind of referendum on Cape independence happening, and we saw how a Cape independence group, which is actually one of the leading movements for Cape secession, has responded to this. So as explained here, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group said on Friday it noted President Cyril Ramaphosa's stance that he has no intention to hold a referendum to test public opinion on any part of South Africa. The CIAG welcomes that the discussion around Cape independence has now become so firmly established in South Africa's political discourse that the President has once again been required to officially comment on it, Craig said. Unfortunately, this article doesn't explain, but I assume that Craig is referring specifically to Phil Craig, who leads the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, as we can see by his picture here. He made the statement after it was reported earlier this week that Ramaphosa gave the clearest indication not to hold a referendum. In line with the constitutional responsibility of the President to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as a supreme law of the Republic and to promote the unity of the nation, I have no intention of considering a proposal or holding a referendum on the secession of any part of the country, Ramaphosa said. He was responding to parliamentary questions from EFF MP Thapelo Mogale, who asked whether he intended to hold a referendum to test public opinion for or against the secession of the Western Cape and the creation of a Volksstaat for Afrikaners and Western Cape independence. However, this is where it gets really interesting. You see, Craig contends that Ramaphosa's comments may be disingenuous, and he explains he charged that the Constitution grants premiers the power to call provincial referendums, and therefore any official referendum on Cape independence would be called by the Western Cape Premier, Alan Winde, and not by him, and Alan Winde is a member of the DA. Craig stated that his party had formally requested Winde to call a referendum and provided Ramaphosa a copy of their request. Since Premier Winde has thus far refused to call such a referendum, we are currently making preparations to hold our own referendum in the Western Cape, following the successful example of Veneto in Italy. Few, if any, referendums are legally binding, so who calls it is less relevant than its credibility. Craig also said funding was currently the primary obstacle to the holding of a private referendum, and the CIAG invited potential funders to get in touch. He added that the blind adherence to the absolute sanctity and supremacy of the Constitution is flawed. So as we can see here, the CIAG is looking to march on ahead with its agenda regardless of Ramaphosa's rejection, as well as the inaction of Alan Winde. And what's really interesting to note is that if we take a look at the Cape Independence Advocacy Group's website, it seems that they really have done their homework on this, and that the South African government is actually wrong when it comes to determining who can call a referendum on secession. So as explained in this article titled DA Need to Understand the Law on Secession Better, it's actually explained here that in section 235 of the South African Constitution and international law, it says that all peoples have the right of self-determination, by virtue of what right they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. It then explains, critically, this right is not given to states but rather to peoples. In another document known as the Kirby Description, the UN describes whom and what defines a peoples expressly for the purpose of assigning the right of self-determination. Should they wish to be so defined, the people of the Western Cape meet the criteria laid out by the Kirby description and therefore have a right to self-determination which is not dependent upon the South African Constitution. So here it explains, it is also crucial to understand that just because the South African Constitution assigns the right of self-determination to the South African people as a whole, that does not and cannot negate the right of the Western Cape peoples to self-determination in a context distinct to the one provided for in the Constitution. And so it appears that they really on different pages. And so it appears that Phil Craig and his group are on a very different page to the South African government. While it seems that the government wants to use the Constitution to deny any sort of referendum from taking place, and of course the secession, it seems that the Cape Advocacy Group is intent on looking at international law, such as that Kirby document as stipulated by the UN. And so they're basically looking to use the UN and international law to trump South African law and the Constitution. Now, of course, it does seem that this kind of argument doesn't have a very big likelihood of actually passing legally in South Africa, right? But what's important to note is that the Cape Independence Advocacy Group could actually come closer to getting Cape independence if they follow the political route. And here's why. So in early 2025, the CIAG decided to do some polling, specifically around Cape independence. So as explained here, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group commissioned Victory Research to conduct another poll on Cape independence. It was a telephone survey. The sample was fully representative of the Western Cape adult population, and the margin for error was 3.5%. Polling took place between the 12th and the 18th of March before the current challenges within the GNU. The sample size was 820, which is statistically significant and in line with accepted international norms. So what's really important to note here is that yes, 820 is a very small sample. However, as explained here, it is statistically significant. Of course, if the polling is done in an accurate way, it can be extrapolated to the entire population, so long as the margin of error is taken into consideration, namely 3.5%. And so what this really means is that as we take a look here, it says that 51% of the respondents support a referendum on Cape independence. And so because the margin of error is 3.5, it could mean that 54.5% actually support it, but it could also mean that 51% minus 3.5, which would be 47.5% support it. So it is very important for us to keep this margin of error in mind. It seems as if the Cape independence movement is picking up steam, because as we take a look at the poll, it says that 51% of Western Cape voters support a referendum on Cape independence. Scrolling further down, we see that 43% support Cape independence outright. So it seems that this means that not only do they support a referendum being held, but they actually just want to be completely independent of the rest of South Africa, whether or not a referendum happens. What's really interesting, however, and this is where the DA needs to be careful, is that it says that of the DA supporters, 50% support Cape independence. 59% say that there should be a referendum, and 65% say that Cape independence would improve my quality of life. So this is quite important because as was previously explained, it seems that the Western Cape Premier, Alan Winde, has the authority to declare a referendum. And what's really important to understand is that the DA currently does not support Cape independence. However, other parties such as the Freedom Front Plus, Referendum Party and Cape Exit do. So what could in fact happen here is that we see how a lot of the DA supporters do seem to support Cape independence. And if these other parties can be able to campaign very strongly in upcoming elections, they may be able to sway DA voters to rather abandon the DA and vote for them as a means of getting a referendum passed. Now, of course, the DA certainly won't like this. And if they can see that a majority of their supporters do support a referendum, and that these supporters are threatening to leave the DA, knowing that the DA does not support a referendum, perhaps the DA could be pressured into hosting a referendum. Of course, this doesn't mean that Cape independence will certainly happen. It really just means holding a vote to see where public opinion lies. Ultimately, it seems that although there's a very low likelihood of Cape independence ever happening, it will certainly be interesting to see if a referendum is held, because ultimately it seems that the momentum is going in that direction. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.